with the afternoon session. And let me say that I would thank Almo to invite me and also for organizing this fantastic meeting in this period. So we'll have 4 talks before the plenary of Bernie Kraus. The first is Klaus. Are you here?
Yes.
Okay. Your study is about data mining soundscape for Orthoptera monitoring, challenges and opportunities.
Exactly, yes. Can I share my screen? Am I
Yes.
co-host?
Almo, please.
Do you see that?
Yes.
Okay. Here we go. Everybody sees that?
Yes.
Okay. Do you hear me well? Is it loud enough?
Yes.
Okay. So my theme is Orthoptera. So up to now, I realized 2 things in this beautiful conference. That it was a little bit birdy, a little bit shifted towards birds, and that it was a little bit anthropocentric with regards to the soundscapes, limited somewhat to the human hearing range. So just a little bit for the birders, a little bit about the sound production mechanisms in Orthoptera. We have 2 big groups. One is the longhorned grasshoppers, the Ensiphera or the katydids. You see one Persilimon from Europe up here, and you already see that the main range of the stridulation is between 15 and 30 kilohertz. So with a normal 48 kilohertz sampling rate, you would miss quite a lot of energy for this species. And then we have the other big group of stridulating Orthoptera, which are the Salifera, the short-horned grasshoppers, or mainly the Acrididae, which are hopping around in the meadows in the European summer, also North America, but also in Uruguay, in the southern hemisphere, of course, in the Austral summer, where I live now. Right now I'm in Bonn, but normally I live and I do my field work in Uruguay. But I decided not to speak about details of my field work and what I'm actually doing. Actually, Filippo gave a great talk yesterday about Orthoptera detection and Orthoptera conservation of the genus Uromenus. So the Uromenus would belong to the Ensiphera up here. And so I think I can spare these details because I want to get another message to you. So first, bioacoustics and Orthoptera diversity. Orthoptera, as we have already learned, often dominate tropical soundscapes. So most of the 17,700 known katydids and 5,700 crickets stridulate. Some of them are silent, but they are the exception. Then there are 4,000 short-horned grasshoppers. Again, some are silent, but there still remain a lot of species to be discovered and to be described. So let's speak of an estimated total of about 17,000 something sound-producing Orthoptera. But unfortunately, in a tropical soundscape, we normally don't know who is who. Here you see some oscillograms of crickets, different crickets living here, difficult to spot in the complex vegetation. And you see that each of those are producing a species-specific inborn song. So it's like an acoustic signature. So that's a good prerequisite to identify species. I would say it is not impossible to identify invertebrates in soundscapes, as we heard today, for example, in the beautiful South Borneo soundscape, which Monaki presented an hour ago or so. We heard at the final end Pomponia imperatoria, which is a big cicada. These cicadas are easy to identify, and in fact, the indigenous people from Borneo, like the Painan, they say that each insect says its name, pronounces its name, and they give onomatopoetic names to the cicadas. So my main job, or my main pastime, which I have in Uruguay right now, is to fill our Orthoptera species file with songs from acridid, from the Southern Hemisphere. I did some research in the 1990s and published sort of a review, but with a lot of gaps and with a lot of recordings on cassette. So we decided to do that work again, which was sponsored by the Orthoptera Society, by a grant from the Orthoptera Society, which allowed me to buy some equipment. And yes. So here, for example, you have this database, which is mainly taxonomy based. It's administering the names, the picture of the types, and also to a certain extent, sound recordings. So I upload these sound recordings to the Orthoptera species database, and they can serve as a reference file. Here, for example, you see a specimen from Borneo, which I collected and recorded in the 1990s. And it took some time until we described it in 2016, with my dear colleague English, who finally was convinced that it is a new species. And this is ideal. We have a picture of the type specimen. We also have pictures of fresh specimens, which are much more beautiful. And we have a field recording of the song. Okay. In addition, the Orthoptera species file allows complex queries, for example, so now it was possible to do a complex query about the extent of coverage of songs. And here we have a bad surprise. And this is the taxa with songs are limited. Taxa with audio in Orthoptera species file. For example, in Asia, in temperate Asia, the ratio between the number of species and the taxa with audio is only 3.6%. Tropical Asia, even worse. Europe is quite good. Europe is well covered, of course. Africa, a disaster. Even North America is badly represented. I will explain in a minute a little bit more about that. That's sort of an artifact. South America, I'm working on that, but still a lot to do. Southern South America, where Uruguay is a little bit better, so I'll put it away. Even Australasia is bad. The Pacific and anywhere else the situation is really bad. Now you can say, okay, your Orthoptera species file is bad. So let's take another view on that and get to GBIF, Global Biodiversity Information Facility. And here we go. I don't know if you know this federated database, which is federating data from museum and from citizen science project, like, for example, iNaturalist. So we can limit our search to Orthoptera, and we can limit our search to audio, and we can get an impressive number of 9,400 recordings, but this is recordings, not species. So now we remove the human observations, which are difficult to validate. And here we go. It shrinks to about 8,000 species and 8,000 specimens. And the analysis on the species level is a little bit more complicated. You have to download the data set and then you find 2,000 species, which is still less than 10% of extant species. So, in other words, Orthoptera reference files are still missing, but at least for reference recordings, data federation via GBIF is possible. You can learn more about that in my publication from 2018 and my EBAC 2019 talk, which is on YouTube. You just Google Reader, YouTube, and EBAC, and you get all this in more detail. So now let's go to soundscapes. I did echoacoustics without realizing that in the 1990s, for example, at this site in Poring, Malaysia, Borneo, where we had some canopy walkways, and I distributed microphones into the crowns, tree crowns, and did cassette recordings of different channels. Then, to stay with the old world, I did some recording in Valdieri, Italy. And then my main working area was Ecuador, Eastern Ecuador rainforest with the Sequoia Indians, and then Panama, Barro Colorado Island as sort of a high-level research station. So I have soundscape recordings from all these sites in different formats, and I started to digitize them, and with the Borneo recordings, I'm nearly through, but of course they are on cassette and so on and so on. So here's some soundscapes. I think I can make that short. So here we have Valdieri, which is dominated by an acridid grasshopper. This is a nice acridid grasshopper recording, which you could analyze and probably could determine down to species level. The other old world recording is from a tropical soundscape, Malaysia, Borneo. You have already listened to those. And you will see that this tropical soundscape is quite different from the two neotropical ones, which are characterized by these pronounced characteristic invertebrate band, which has already been mentioned by several soundscape recorders. This kind of insect noise, which is mainly due to very small crickets, which are missing in Poring, in Sabah. Of course, you have crickets in Borneo, but you don't have this sort of rainforest plankton which you have in the neotropics, and it, of course, is difficult to analyze. So let's have a look left and right. Many soundscapes, of course, contain interesting insect recordings. For example, this one here about the Caatinga Orchestra, which just appeared a few days ago. So I put it here as an example for thousands of other interesting recordings. At night, acoustic activity was prevalent, as we have learned already. So that means that in principle, it would be possible to use these soundscapes for data mining and go into that deep drill into these sound recordings and try if you can extract some of the sounds and correlate them with a certain species. Or if you can't correlate it with a species, then at least you could store it and say, okay, I have a different song and I store it until the songster is discovered. But soundscapes lack data federation, as we have in recordings from single specimens. So GBIF can't manage soundscapes. The lack of protocols for snippet annotation acknowledgement, traceability doesn't allow to connect these soundscapes to GBIF. So how do I find all these soundscapes? So to solve this problem, we would need a data warehouse for sound recordings. And I described this in this publication here from 2018. So as I have explained, we have two types of raw data. We have overall passive acoustic monitoring data. And for example, I'm using AudioMoth at the moment. Even in the ultrasound, I use 192 kilohertz sampling, even for recording acoustics, which was quite useful. And then we have targeted recordings, which I also use the AudioMoth. So I do have a specimen in the cage. I have the AudioMoth near the cage, and I wait until it sings, and then I cut out the AudioMoth recording, and I have a beautiful high frequency, including reference recording. And I have the voucher specimen. So this goes in here, and this goes into Orthoptera species file. But where go the acoustic scenes and snippets? And I want to speak a little bit about long-term storage of audio recordings. And in fact, this morning I came across this article in Science. In case of death, researchers should plan for how our work can continue without us. So let's talk a little bit about sustainability of soundscape recordings. For example, there is this beautiful real remote laboratory, acoustic assessment laboratory developed by Stuart Gage, one of my favorite websites. And actually, I thought to solve the data gap for the North American acoustics, I could tune into some pre-recordings and try to discover them there and extract them from the real laboratory. And these days, unfortunately, I couldn't connect with a server. And the only way to connect to the server is by the web archive via the Wayback Machine. So I wonder, as this symposium is dedicated to Stuart Gage, maybe somebody knows what happens with these data sets. And there were a lot of interesting data sets there. And a similar thing I observed with the Purdue server, Human Environment Modeling and Analysis Laboratory. Maybe they were momentary down, but again, I had to access them via web archive. So I fear that these interesting soundscapes mentioned here are not accessible anymore. But there are some new kids on the block. So, for example, there's Bioacoustica, and some of my long-term soundscape recordings I uploaded to Bioacoustica, and in fact, Ed Baker, the manager from Bioacoustica, helped me to digitize some digital cassettes. I don't know if anybody remembers digital cassettes. It was a format which has now become extinct, only existed for several years, a decade or so. And then there's the new RB-known RFCX website, which was launched a few months ago. And you see there seem to be interesting Panama recordings there, and I'm thinking of uploading my stuff there. I invite everybody to, I'm disposed to share my soundscapes with everybody who's interested in such a public repository. And of course, on the contrary, I would be interested to do some data mining on your recordings if they cover interesting Orthoptera sites. So these are some of the soundscape projects which seem to work. And then I thought about other options.
Klaus, sorry, could you finish?
Yes. I'm finishing. Other options for bioacoustic data warehouse, for example, are the open source Napster servers where the files remain with the author. Okay, so I leave about this problem here. In any case, Soundscapes provide great opportunities for monitoring and species conservation. Soundscapes and sound libraries have to become interoperable to avoid fragmentation and double work. And a challenge for better multimedia data management is annotation and long-term storage. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you. We have time for one question, if you have. Because it's 2:30, so if there is no question, we can go.
There are two I see here. Busetti has a question and Christian Köhler.
Okay. There are two hands. So the first is Christian, please, Christian.
Klaus, you mentioned the problem of long-term storage, and the problem is not new. We've talked about it in the past. Who do you think could be managing such an archive? It must be some institution, some official institution that would be able to maintain such an archive for decades, not for years. And usually problems only last for a few years.
Right, of course, yes. That has to be a memory institution. I would prefer a natural history museum. In fact, the Paris Museum, I think, is sort of well prepared for that, because they have individual recordings in a phonotape, which is rather professional. And of course, they have Jerome Sir there, who is interested in soundscapes. So he might be able, or Paris might be able to do something like that. Museum König, why not, in cooperation with Simon, as you presented yesterday, if we can convince them, it should be possible. But as you know, we even have problems right now with the individual recording databases like Systax and DOSA, and even those are sort of red listed now. So I think museum people still are not aware of the task ahead of them, that they now have to create digital data. But as you say, a private enterprise or an NGO thing like Rainforest, Arbimon, they will not be able to do it. We are speaking about decades and centuries and not about 5 years.
Okay, Filippo, very quickly.
Thank you very much, Klaus, for your talk, and thank you for calling the attention to invertebrates, because if we know rather well which vertebrate species are on the verge of extinction now, we don't know about invertebrates. We know that at the moment insects are the animal group that is extinguishing at a higher rate. So I think that is very needed a particular attention to this group. Thank you, Klaus.
Yeah, definitely. And just remember, ornithologists, no birds without insects. Thank you.
So thank you, Klaus. We don't have time for other questions. And so Taylor, Shaw, if you are ready, please. Thank you.
Hello, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay. It says
Please,
I cannot.
Klaus, stop to share your screen.
Okay. Just I think you can throw me out if you stop my co-hosting.